Well, every once in a while, we need to think about what it takes to create a truly high performing team. And there's some great ideas out there. And today I've got a guest who's going to help us understand that. And he's got quite a personal story of some pretty high performance adventure. We're going to get into that when we come right back.
You're listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense with your host, Doug Thorpe. Here's Doug.
Hello again, everyone. You are listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense. I'm your host, Doug Thorpe, and today I have a guest, Mr. Bryan Gillette, who himself is an executive coach and a person that helps people with improving their team performance. Welcome to the show, Bryan.
Doug, it's nice to be on the show. Thanks for having me.
I didn't want to be mysterious, but what I said, when you've got a little experience in this high performance, you are an extreme athlete, or I don't know what's the right word for it.
Some have said extreme, some had said crazy. So technically it would be an ultra distance athlete.
Ultra distance.
But okay. I've heard extreme and I've heard crazy, so I'm not offended by any of them.
Well, I'm in extreme in the scale sense, not in the mental sense.
both probably work.
Although I think it's I'm going to let you cite a few of your accolades in that arena. There's a couple that come to my mind, but I'm going to let you explain to everybody what that means.
Yeah, so I'm guessing the one that come to your mind, a couple of the bigger ones is I did cycle across the United States. That was years ago. That's when I was 20. So that's 4,000 miles. I did it by myself. I didn't plan to do it by myself, but some last minute changes occurred and required me to do it. Or I shouldn't say required. Then I did it. I've done a lot on the bike, cycling, 300 miles in 24 hours. And I'd done just other bike events. And I thought, I want to start looking at running. So I did a marathon, then I did a 50 miler, then I did a 100 miler, and then I did a 200 mile run around Lake Tahoe, which is all at, the lowest point we hit about 5,500 feet, and then we got to almost 10,000 feet. So it's elevation. It's 8 marathons back to back. You have 100 hours to do it. I was able to complete it in 76 hours. So
my goodness. And as I recall in the notes, you only had 90 minutes of sleep during all of that?
I did not sleep much. So you keep running. You go as long as you can. There are aid stations every 15 to 20 miles where you can stop, you can get a new pair of shoes, you can get food, you can get water, clean up a little, get some new pair of socks, and then you sleep when you want to sleep. I had planned to sleep somewhere around the 30 hours in, at about 30 to 36 hours, and I just couldn't fall asleep. Earlier in the day, I had taken a caffeine pill because I was having a hard time stay awake. And so I took a caffeine pill and I was eating food that was heavy in caffeine. So it was waking me up and
my goodness.
And it's like, all right, let's go. And so finally at somewhere around, I think 60 hours in, I was just so tired. And I came into one of the aid stations and it's like, wake me up in an hour. I told my crew and they woke me up in an hour. I said, can I have 30 more minutes? And then after 90 minutes, I would have loved to have slept longer. They said, get out of here.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on all that. What a feat. So tell us a little bit about your career background and what led you into executive coaching.
Yeah, I know you kind of frame it often with what's your journey? And I love that question. I do a lot of leadership programs and I asked them to look back at their journey and kind of the highs and lows. As I was preparing for this, Doug, I was thinking about that, and I guess if there were a number of things that kind of started off in college, and I was fortunate enough to take this college class. This would have been in the late '80s. And the instructor was teaching a class called 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Mm-hmm. You may have heard about it. And at the time, it was not very popular because that book came out, I believe, in '89. And so this was about that time. And then the year later, it just took off and went crazy. And I remember my instructor knew Stephen Covey and invited him into the class to come and guest lecture. And we had no idea who this big, tall, bald guy was, but very charismatic. And the stuff that he was talking about kind of values, about setting your life list, about figuring out what's important, just resonated with me. And so I thought, how do I do more there? And I got involved with an internship, working with a small business, a consultant, and she had connections into Ken Blanchard. And so I got to meet him. So early on, I got to meet kind of some of the powerhouses and see what they do. And so that really intrigued me. And that's when I started to go into, it's like, I want to go into maybe human resources, leadership development. And then another thing happened. There was a woman I was dating at the time in college, and I was over at her house and I was talking to her mom. And I heard her mom talk about how she just hated everything about her job and just did not like the people, did not like the work. And she was probably in her mid 50s or early 50s at the time. And it's and I'm at that age now, it's hard to change careers later on in life. And I saw how frustrated she was and how she just hated things and how miserable. And I remember telling myself, I never want to be in that situation. Where you have to go to work because of the money, you have to go to work because you can't move to something else. And that really started getting me thinking about what's important. And so when I looked at jobs, when I've changed jobs, I realized like I have that control. So I started looking at what are the industries I want to focus on. I started looking at my values of what's important to me, and just had some great managers and leaders that I was able to work with. And then about 10 years ago, after having a really good career in human resources, being the VP of HR, my wife and I had been to about a dozen funerals in the 5 previous years. And I had 2 kids that were, I think they were 3 and 5 at the time. And I thought, I'm going to step away and I'm going to start my own business. I'm going to do what's important, do what I love, and make sure that I'm focusing on the things that are most important to me. Because my kids are going to grow up. My parents are eventually not going to be with me. I'm fortunate they're in their 80s now and they're still with us. So that got me into kind of starting my own business and doing things around leadership development, kind of what I had done in my career.
Well, it happens so often. Many of my coaching colleagues have had similar journeys. They dedicated their careers to the HR realm, and I think the more modern term is talent management or talent development.
It's changed many times in our careers, Doug.
And I'm not being facetious about that, but we all know that that's kind of how they've gone. And they report similar cases. I'll tell you a real quick side story. My listeners have heard this maybe once or twice before. I've got a very good friend to this day. We used to work together at the bank where we started out many, many years ago. We've stayed friends, and we still have weekly breakfast meetings to this day. And he was an HR guy, though. He's now retired. But he took a spin as he got up in the ranks in HR with a large global brand. He advocated to the chairman that if they would redefine HR and work on nothing but the managers, that all the personnel problems would go away.
Yeah. And what was the response?
Well, it came about that his company was being contracted to manage all the resources over in Afghanistan. There was a turnover in the global contracts for that. And he was being asked to go over there as the number 2 HR guy on that, 50,000 employees on the payroll there. And they told him, they said, you know what, do that there. And let that be a test bed and let's see how it works. Well, it worked amazingly well.
And so did they bring it back?
No, sadly they didn't. There were mindsets ingrained, et cetera, and they just couldn't. That was a leap too far. So they never really went that way. But if you and I don't want to get too far off our topic today, but if you think about it, the other phrase among HR professionals that I know said people join companies, but they quit bosses.
Yeah.
And that is sadly so incredibly true.
Yeah.
So that statement alone may be a good segue. The other element I talk about a lot is my observation is we have a strange tradition in modern business. We need a frontline supervisor. So what do? We go to the shop floor, we find the best producer, and we appoint them to be supervisor. Now they're on the management track.
And it's a completely different skill.
Completely different
Yeah.
mindset, skill, etc. And if they figure out how to muddle through that the first time or two, they get awarded by getting promoted again,
Yeah.
And next
And
thing you know, they've had about 3 promotions, and somebody says, we ought to send this guy to training.
Well, and that's the good, if that happens, that's generally better than the alternative where you take this star performer that have been great production, and then you move him or her up into be a manager, and they just fail. And then it's like, you look at him, it's like, hey, yeah, Doug's not cutting it. Let's get rid of him. And so then you've taken this phenomenal person and you've gotten rid of them because the organization failed that individual.
That's right. You ruined your best producer for
Yeah.
that shop, whatever it may be. Well, as you have, I imagine when you made the pivot into your new practice, and of course, I'm looking at your profile, I guess that was about 10 years ago, right?
It was 10 years ago this month.
Oh, congratulations.
So, yeah, it was 10 years ago. So,
when you began formulating your own agenda, approach, or content, or whatever you want to call it, what were some of the elements that were going through your mind of what you wanted to kind of attack as you provided that service?
Well, I'd like to say, Doug, that 10 years ago when I made that transition, everything was crystal clear. I was going to focus on these exact same things, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners can appreciate this, but that wasn't the case. I think finally after 10 years, I'm starting to get to that point. You go out on your own, and a client calls, and it's like, yeah, that's not my wheel, or I can do it.
Not
and
my
you kind of
perfect match.
Yeah, it's not a perfect match, but I'll do it. And I remember before I made the leap, I was talking to someone who had done it successfully and still doing it very successfully. And she said, you got to really get focused on where you want to work on. What are the types of clients you're going to take? What are the types of projects you're going to do? And that's easy when you have a book of business. When you're just getting started and you don't have as much, you have to decide, okay, am I going to take that? And I'm at the point, I've been this point for a long time, where it's like I can get stuff. It's like, that I'm not the best person to do it. I could probably do it, but you could go somewhere else and get it done cheaper, better. And I love that ability to choose, okay, this is what I want to work on, and this is where I want to focus. So, it was early on, it's like really kind of starting to figure out, okay, what are the types of assignments? What are the types of projects do I want to work on? And that takes time to figure it out. I had some flexibility, and I had, financially, where I didn't have to worry too much about it. And so, but there's freedom in being able to say, I'm not going to take that project. It's not right. I think it also gives me credibility with the client, that they know I'm not going to sell them something that I can't do. I'm going to say, no, I'm not the best person.
Yeah. I think there's a lot to be said for that. And yes, what you said at the start, I think potentially all entrepreneurs have had a taste of that idea that you open the doors for business, you've got an idea what you want to do, but inevitably the first customer that walks through the door is not exactly what you want to do.
Right.
And you kind of say, well, I do know that, I can provide that. Yeah, let's talk. And next thing you know, you've engaged, and the good news is you got a little bit of revenue there, but the bad news is you might have taken your eye off the prize and kind of delayed the development of the real path that you want to be on.
Yeah. And you're not, when you're doing stuff that isn't your core, isn't what you love doing, I think that comes out to clients, and
I agree.
and they know it, and so you're not performing at your best. And I've I do a fair amount of executive coaching where generally I like to work with somebody that they want to be doing this.
Hmm.
And I've had some people come to me. I've had leaders like CEOs come and say, "Hey, Bryan, will you work with this individual? They're not performing, and if they don't perform, we're going to have to get rid of them." And the conversation I will often have is, I can do it. I can spend the 6 months working with the individual, but if they're not engaged, there's going to be
Yeah.
no change in behavior, and the only person that's going to win in this is me, because I'm going to get a nice paycheck. And I said, I don't think you want to go down that route.
Yeah.
Let me propose some alternatives to try to turn things around, and then maybe we go down that route.
Yeah. I'm with you there on that. I do the same thing in my practice. When I start hearing a proposition that sounds like a fixer upper,
Yeah.
I shake my head and say no. Or what I usually do, I lean into it really hard, and I might even, and I have gone so far as to use the word. Do you think this person is broken, and are you asking me to fix them?
Hmm.
And a few times the answer has been, well, now that you say it that way, yeah, that is what we're doing. And I'll say, nope, not interested in doing that.
But
And
go ahead. Sorry.
well, and for me, it's just a general kind of core value thing, but it aligns very well, I think, even with what some of the code of ethics with the ICF, the International
Mm.
Coaching Federation, professes. We want to count people as whole. We want to meet them where they are. And if the person has already been set up to fail, which inevitably is the situation, when we get that call, that's not a good place to meet.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree wholeheartedly with you on that one. So it took me a couple of times before I realized, I was called in, this is a fix it situation, and I was deep into it. And so now I ask more questions to kind of understand, are we a fix it, or are you really trying to develop? Because I've been caught off guard on that one
Yeah.
before.
Yeah, or you say to the champion of the project, you say, are you truly investing in this person for their bona fide development going forward?
Yeah.
Or are you just trying to satisfy a grievance that somebody filed? And
which is like, I don't want to get involved
no,
in the middle of this one.
right, right.
So,
Well, let's pivot a little bit and tell us a little bit about your book, Bryan. What all do you have in Epic Performance?
yeah, so the full title of the book, it's called Epic Performance: Lessons from 100 Executives and Endurance Athletes on Reaching Your Peak. And the concept it actually came probably about 10 years ago. I was trying to push myself to my limit. I had done a lot on the bike, and I thought I want to do a 300-mile bike ride, 24 hours. First time that I was going through the night on an event. And I thought this could actually push me to my physical and mental limit. Really, it's the mental part that goes first before the physical. And earlier in the day, I had seen a person dead on the side of the road. I collided with, it was, there was a 200-mile ride that I was doing, part of an organized ride, and then I did 100 extra on my own. And a person died. Earlier, I had also collided with another bike and kind of needed a new wheel. So it was pushing me. There's no doubt about it. And 300 miles, that I knew was going to push. And so about 275 miles into the ride, I could see the finish line. It's like 2 or 3 in the morning. I had 25 miles left, and I thought, this was tough. There's no doubt about it, but I didn't come close to reaching that limit. And it started getting me thinking about, we put these limits in our head and we don't go past them. And maybe those limits could be pushed a little bit further. And so I looked at that in my career. I looked at that in other ultra distance events. And And I remember another thing that was kind of pivotal to get me to start to write the book was my wife and I took our kids out of school for a year, a couple of years ago, and we traveled around the world for 1 year. And as we were leaving, friends held a going away party, and a number of people came up to me and said, I could never do what you're doing. And I thought, God, that was disappointing, because it would be one thing if you said, I don't want to do what you're doing, but you were saying I can't do what you were doing, and you could. You have to plan for it. And so the combination of those two events led me to realize, how do we kind of go further? How do we get rid of some of these excuses? And so that's when I set the goal to interview 100 kind of C-level folks, founders of companies, and other ultra distance athletes, just because I think there's similarities, to learn how do you push those limits, and how do you kind of dream out more than a year, looking out 5, 10, 20, 30 years out. And that's where epic performance came. And the epic, what it stands for, the E, is how do you envision the big things in life that you want to accomplish in life, at work? The P is how do you put a plan in place in order to do that? I is how do you iterate to that plan? You kind of work your way up. And then C is how do you collaborate with others? I'm sure when you you got this podcast going, you probably talked to other people that had done podcasts.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and there's somebody else that has done it successfully or done it and unsuccessfully, and how do you learn from that? And then lastly, how do you go and perform? Eventually you got to get out and you got to run the marathon, or you got to start the business. So it's kind of that was kind of that start to finish. And so the book will be out on August 16th.
Oh, that's great. We'll definitely look forward to it. And by the way, just while we're on this topic, all the information about that will be in the show notes here. But we're going to break for a short commercial message, and then we'll be right back to this episode.
Business is all about solving complex problems as fast as you can create them. Become the best problem solver by leading others to greatness too. And the first step is going to DougThorpe.com. Doug Thorpe is known globally for coaching entrepreneurs and business leaders, improving their performance and the work output of everyone surrounding them. You can find health, wealth, and happiness by learning to lead others to health, wealth, and happiness. Go to DougThorpe.com now and order Doug's books or hire him to coach your managers. That's DougThorpe.com.
It's interesting you bring up that mental aspect of it. I was actually on a show yesterday, and the host is ex-military, as am I, and we were talking a little bit about the real essence of what military training ultimately is about. And it's one thing to, learn the tactical strategies or how to work the equipment or how to mobilize and how to move around in a so-called, battlefield environment. But the real basic training that you go through does one big thing. It proves to you that your body is far more capable of doing things that you never imagined you would.
Yeah.
So you go in with a limited belief, even if you might be predisposed to be thinking you're pretty open-minded, pretty aggressive, pretty willing to take a challenge, take a risk or whatever. You're not going to take any of the risk they show you in basic training. You're not going to choose to do that stuff. But they put you through it, and you have this epiphany about, my goodness, what an amazing machine this body is, and look what this thing can do if you just put your mind to it.
Yeah, I mean, it is an amazing machine. And first of all, thank you for your service. I had seen and knew that you were in the military, and I appreciate kind of your service and everybody that has served. So thank you for that.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I mean, the body, and that's part of what I talk about in the book, is the body can go further than we think it can.
Mm-hmm.
I've read just numerous studies where you take somebody, you push them and you push them and you push them and you push them, and you tell them, okay, this is the last you're going to have to do it. And then they do it. And then you say, okay, I need you to do 5 more. And they can do 5 more. I mean, any of the ultra distance stuff, the reason people stop most often is not because their legs were tired, it's because their mind said, I just can't go any further. And so that mind is just the most powerful muscle. And how do we keep going? And whether that's at work, whether that's in sport, and it's the mind that will often stop the other parts of the body.
Well, and that statement is not just a metaphor for things. It's a literal application of where executives and business owners stumble, because they'll find themselves with a situation that's bigger, deeper, more valuable than anything they've ever done before, and they start playing those negative tapes. I always, once upon a time, I was in banking, and I was a real estate banker, and now I've kind of fast forwarded, and I say the most valuable piece of real estate on the planet is the 6 inches between your ears.
Location.
And if you can learn how to control that, and I love your acronym there, if you can envision that future state, that success you want to achieve, and as I say that, it reminds me of a learning I had a couple of years ago. I was working with some of the folks out of Mary Morrissey's organization, and one of the guys I was talking to was the first guy that had ever presented me with this, but I've loved it and I've used it ever since. He said, let's do a quick role play. He says, what if 5 years from now I bump into you at the airport and I look at you and I say, my goodness, Doug, you look great. Where are you headed off to? What are you doing? What's going on in your life? What's been so much that's happened that you look and act and are doing what you're doing? And he said, tell me what it would take to get you there, and then you just kind of open everything up and say, well, this, that, and the other thing. And I thought, that's actually an interesting exercise that people can do to hopefully take the lid off.
Yeah, and I would say even like look 10 or 15 or 20 years out, which is a lot harder. There's no doubt about it. And then be able to define, what does that finish line look like? I mean, if I'm of the view that I have a tremendous amount of control of which way I go. And so if I go right and I trip, probably because it was my fault that I tripped, but I have a lot of influence. There are some things that are clearly outside my control, but how do you define that path of where you want to go, or define that destination? I mean, you think about, and I'm sure you've heard this a million times, is, when a pilot gets in the airplane, they know what their flight path is and they know where their destination is. And all along, they're going to be moving off that flight path, but they're always course correcting. And so how are we figuring out what is that destination and kind of where is it we want to go? I remember, when I was in that Covey class, 30 some odd years ago, thinking about, okay, I know eventually I want to run my own business. I know I want to, travel. I know this is, and so I kind of laid those things out. And so I don't think it's coincidental that where I'm at now is because of, those thoughts then. So how do we think further out?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up again. I wanted to say, when you first mentioned Covey's teachings, I too had the benefit in the late 80s, early 90s. He was on his book tour and came through Houston, and I went to a big, day-long conference he was putting on, and it was phenomenal. Just amazing teaching and eye-opening ideas. And I love that idea. I think specifically in his 7 habits, it's begin with the end in mind.
Yeah.
And to this day, I still talk to a lot of my clients about that. And occasionally some of the bigger companies will call me in, and there'll be a level of leadership that they want to get some coaching. And it's not uncommon, partly because of my own chronology. I get paired off with some of the guys that are, I'll say it this way, inside of 5 years of their retirements.
Yeah.
And inevitably, one of the first discussions or questions they'll ask me, they'll say, well, I'm glad we're doing this, but why the hell me? I mean, I see the runway, I see the terminal in front of me, and I'm coming in for a landing, man. Why would I do this? And what I learned a long time ago, when that happens, I challenged those guys. I said, okay, fair enough. You're probably not going to change your basic MO. I said, but
Mhm.
tell you what, have you focused on the legacy you want to leave here? And it freezes them in their tracks. It absolutely
Yeah.
stuns them. And I've seen very grizzled older executives actually have a tear in their eye when we start talking about that.
Yeah. No, I think it's so important. You're gonna say more, so go
Well,
ahead.
and what I tell them is, all right, how about we use this period of engagement? Let's talk about what it's going to take to secure and or change the legacy you've created at this point. And they dive right in every time,
Yeah.
every time.
And how many of those guys, or were most of them, it sounds like, did you kind of help shape what the time beyond, their career was?
You're right. Great question. All of that got those juices flowing and got
Yeah.
them started down that path.
I mean, I think that's an important question, whether or not you're just starting your career or you're kind of at the tail end of your career. And this got me thinking. My dad retired when he was 50, which is relatively young, and I was kind of self-sufficient a little bit before then. And he said one of the hardest parts of retiring, and the head of the household, I would go into the office and I was in charge of things, and I was the breadwinner, and I had a purpose. And when he retired, that changed, and he wasn't the most important person around because people weren't coming asking him questions.
Right.
And he goes, I wish there was a book on that, and I'm
There
sure
is
that
actually.
okay, now there are.
There is, and often when I'm talking to people of that ilk, I do point them. There's a guy named Bob Buford out of Dallas.
Oh,
He is now deceased, but a number of years ago, he wrote a book, and I was introduced to it. And a tragic cause for him to write the book. His teenage son died in a drowning accident on the Rio Grande River. But he wrote the book, and the title of it is Halftime.
you referenced that in one of the other podcasts I was listening
And
to.
it is a phenomenal story, but it speaks to just exactly the same thing you said, that we spend the first half of our life searching for success. And with that comes a certain amount of significance and accolade and respect and honor and whatever else you want to think of. But when you face that halftime moment where you go in the locker room and you say, "Well, I'm about halfway there. What am I doing? What was all this about? Why am I doing this?" You pivot the thinking and you start. If you're intentional about it, you start thinking about significance, not
Yeah,
success. I mean,
yeah.
true significance. And whether that's giving back to a community, becoming a coach,
Hmm.
becoming a mentor, volunteering, any number of wonderful vehicles that are out there now that allows people to do that. But you have to think about it. You have to decide what that is.
You do, and I have found some of the most rewarding projects I've worked on have been the pro bono ones, because I'm doing it for a different reason. I remember you talking in a previous podcast about that book, and it got me thinking. My day two of my very first job, it was a management training program. For a well-respected financial services company. And I remember the second in charge, the number two guy, came up and he talked about something similar. He talked about, we go through these phases, learn, earn, return, and yearn. And where early on in your career, you're learning things, and then you get in, you start making money, you start earning, and then you get into a place, where you can start returning back some of the things you've learned, and then you can kind of sit back and yearn. And the more I think about that is, I don't know if it's less phases, but those four, if it's a pie, the different elements would increase, because you should always be figuring out how to give back. You should always be yearning and looking back. You should always be learning. I mean, according to that, I'd be well outside the learning phase, but I'm learning a whole lot now. You're talking to people like you, talking to the 100 people for the book. And so I think at different phases, it kind of moves in and out. And so I love that halftime. I'm gonna have to look at that book.
Yeah, check it out. And there's actually an organization that he created that still exists to this day. It is called the Halftime Institute up there. And just for full disclosure, I'm not affiliated with them. I'm not selling anything. I'm not going to get any royalties for sharing it. It's just a phenomenal piece of work. And it was very meaningful to me as I began to shape some things and think about things. And, just to be very personal about it, I've made a choice. I mean, I'll be 70 years old next year, and I keep doing what I have no desire to retire, whatever retirement is supposed to mean. I have the flexibility to do what I want to do and stack my schedule the way I want to stack it and go, take a trip or go do something. But
how fortunate are we, Doug? I mean, I think we can have this conversation. It's like, how fortunate are we? Now, you probably made a lot of really good decisions that got you to that point, and allowed you to be in this situation.
It was a mixed bag.
We all make bad ones too.
Again, full disclosure, it was a mixed bag. It wasn't all perfect.
No, it's never perfect, and anybody that says it's perfect is lying to you. But I know my wife and I, she's in her early 50s. I'm in my kind of going into my mid 50s. Is all right. What is that legacy that we want to leave? And how can we make it a lasting legacy? So long before we're gone, long after we're gone, there are things that are going to be paying dividends that can support some of the things that are most important to us. So I love that question that you ask folks is, what's that legacy? What's that legacy in your career? But, on a bigger scale, when you leave this earth, depending on kind of what your views are, it's like, what is that legacy?
It is interesting. I even occasionally have had some of my younger clients, and when I say younger, actually late 30s, early to mid 40s. Occasionally, I'll have one of them ask me, what it's like to get to my stage of life, and what I'll tell them is, if I've learned anything, any amount of visioning you do for where you think you want to go, it's great to be a dreamer and put it out there. But once you decide that's what you think you want to do, you've got to be intentional every day about what you're going to do. And I think you have it in your acronym there, that iteration process.
Yeah, that is. And as I talked to the 100 folks, that came up. It's really know what your priorities are. You got to know what you're going to say yes to, but you got to know what you're going to say no to as well. I mean, we all have 168 hours in the week, and how we use that is, can vary. I talked to one person. He's a CHRO for a mid-size technology company. He's also a former FIFA referee. So he refereed soccer at the highest level of the game. And then he's an Ironman. And so he's a busy guy. He's got two girls.
Something going on. Yeah.
He's got something going on. He's got a wife and two kids. So it's not like he's sitting around on the couch. And he says, I said, how do you find the time to kind of train for an Ironman? And he said, when I look at what I need to do for an Ironman, I need to find 12 hours in the week. And 12 hours represents about 7% of my week. He goes, I can find 12 hours. And that was consistent. I had heard that many other ways through other executives, that I'm going to say no to this. And even when I was training for the Tahoe 200 run, there were some weeks I was exercising 30 hours a week. I was either running or biking or doing something, moving 30 hours a week. And when you take 30 hours, you got to take that 30 hours from something else. Now,
Right.
You can take the couple hours that you sit on the couch and watch TV, but then something else has to give as well. And that's when it really forces you to prioritize, what is most important. And it's the
Mhm.
same thing at work. People often say, "Oh, I don't have enough time to do all that." Okay. What are the three most important things you ought to be doing this quarter? Focus on those.
Yeah.
And really get clear on what it
Yeah.
is. So that I heard that message over and over from executives and people who push themselves in the endurance side.
Well, and this is going to end up sounding like the Steve Covey hour, and I don't say that disrespectfully, but what you said reminded me of yet another Stephen Covey teaching. He popularized the model of the rocks, pebbles, and sand in the container.
Yeah.
And the one I saw him do was like a giant bowl that had pretty good size rocks in it. But the idea is we all face that. We've got big, important things we need to be doing, and we've got some not so important things that come around. And then we've got a ton of little granular noise that is in our life.
Yeah.
And it's obviously accelerated by the availability of technology and social media. And I'm at a place, I love it when I get that little weekly ping on my phone or my iPad that says your screen time is down from last week. And I go, yes.
I do the same thing. Yeah. Well, I
So,
mean, you look at that prioritization, and I've read stuff about Barack Obama as a president, how he could manage things, or Steve Jobs, and what both of those guys do. Steve Jobs he took it to the extreme, is he wore the same outfit every day, and the reason why is making decisions takes brain power. And so if all I need to do is go in and grab this, I don't need to make a decision. So I'm not wasting brain power on that stuff that doesn't need brain power wasted on. And I can focus on bigger things. And President Obama was the same thing. He goes, see me, I wore the same color suit every day. And so and anybody who's operating at that level, whatever, president or executive, they have to figure out, I can't do this. This is what I have to do.
Yep. Yep. It is about setting those priorities and lining them up with what those goals and objectives are. Well, Bryan, this has been a great time together. It's just really can't believe we've been at it this long, but I think we're going to have to go ahead and kind of put a bow on it and wrap it up. Tell people how they can get a hold of you if they're interested in reaching out and finding out more.
All right, Doug. Well, I appreciate the time. So the best way to reach me is go to epicperformances.com. So it's EPIC performances.com. And you can connect for me there. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. If you go to epicperformances.com, there is an assessment that you can take. It's a free assessment. You can go ahead and take that. And if you just type in leadership as the company code, that'll get you through that. So epicperformances.com. My book's out on Amazon now, and so feel free to reach out to me.
Well, all good stuff. And thank you again for being on the show and sharing your great story with everybody.
Thanks, Doug. It's been great talking to you. And again, thank you for your service.
Oh, you're very welcome. Happy to have done it. Well, folks, we're going to wrap it up and take it home here. I want to remind you, if you're listening on your favorite streaming service, that we do have a video of this over on YouTube, the channel by the same name, Leadership Powered by Common Sense. Hop over there, check out the other videos and links for things we're offering. And you will see that I am in a bit of a campaign right now. There's a kind of a focus I'm doing for my small business owners. I call it Founder to CEO. It's a 4-part exercise that I help owners go through and take a look at what it's going to take for them to kind of bump up and go to the next level. People ask me, well, who needs that? And I'll say, well, the owner that has already had some success but feels like he's plateaued, kind of stalled, stuck, or been blocked by something. been in that do loop of trying the same thing again and again, can't seem to get past that. You're the guy that needs to jump in and work with us and know that. So hop over to the links that I've got in the show here, and you can find out a lot more about that. But thanks for listening. We'll hope to see you again soon, real soon. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Leadership Powered by Common Sense, hosted by Doug Thorpe. If you would like to know more about the coaching and advisory services he provides, visit dougthorpe.com.